Welcome to the EchoJunction podcast.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for episode number 121 of the EchoJunction podcast. We're talking social and digital. My name is Adam Fraser. I'm the founder of EchoJunction. And if you're interested in the strategic landscape of social media, digital marketing, and marketing technology, this is very much the podcast for you. Have a fantastic returning guest to bring you today, ladies and gents. It's Mr. Jeremy Epstein, and we're here to talk about blockchain and marketing. Jeremy has just released a new ebook called The CMO Primer for the Blockchain World. There is a truckload of content out there on blockchain more broadly, which is totally understandable given the magnitude of the potential change coming from this technology. But in terms of what it means for marketers, then Jeremy is the guy. He's made this space his own. He is incredibly knowledgeable and insightful, and I highly recommend the book that he's put out on blockchain and marketing. So hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for your support of this podcast. Enjoy the chat, and I will check in with you at the end. I'm delighted to welcome Jeremy Epstein to the EchoJunction podcast. Jeremy is founder, CEO of Never Stop Marketing, and a returning guest, of course. Jeremy, a very big welcome back.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know the old thing about there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and you can turn any sort of fact into a stat, but I think you are the fastest returning podcast guest to the EchoJunction podcast, if that, means anything.
That's a good metric. We can have the time to the TTR, the time to return or repeat performance metric. So that could work. And as somebody who lives in Washington, D.C., I'm very familiar with lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Now, Jeremy, very big welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you back on, but you are just churning out some amazing content, which was really the catalyst to get you back on so quickly. So you've written another ebook, and I almost feel unkind calling it an ebook. It's an extremely substantive document on marketing and blockchain again, which we will get into. But look, I will link up our first chat in the show notes, Jeremy, but there's new guests coming, new audience members coming in all the time. So maybe for people that don't know too much about you, just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit about your backstory.
Yeah, sure. So most recently, I was head of marketing at a company called Sprinkler, which is proud to say is a unicorn. And I joined there where there were about 30 people. The company was valued at about $20 million. And about 4 years later, we had 1,400 people. We were valued at $1.8 billion. And that was obviously, clearly I didn't do it all by myself, but it was an amazing experience. And, going all the way back till when I started my career in Tokyo, Japan, and, pre-internet 1.0 boom, as it were, my passion's just always been, how do you take, or, when these new disruptive technologies start to come onto the scene, what do you do to help bring them into the mainstream? And then the second question I always like to think about is, well, how does the craft and practice and function of marketing evolve because of the arrival of these new technologies? So, social being the most recent example of, conversations went from monologues turned into dialogue, shall we say. And now I'm just thinking about the same thing as we move into sort of blockchain and decentralizing technologies.
Yeah, so Jeremy, chat number one was a great exploration of your time at Sprinkler and what that was just in terms of the growth story and also what it said about the social media technology space. And we did touch on blockchain. We'll dive just into blockchain for this the sequel, if we can call it that, podcast episode. But again, I will link up your podcast. I will also link up the podcast I did with Alex Tapscott about a year ago, who wrote a book, The Blockchain Revolution. So lots of kind of educational context for people that just want to increase their knowledge on this thing, blockchain, that seems to be everywhere at the moment. But again, for audience members listening that maybe just don't know too much about blockchain, do you want to just start off by introducing the concept?
Sure. I should say that up front, I'm a little nervous that I'm on the sequel here because aside from Godfather, the sequel is always worse than the first one. So this There's a lot of pressure, and I don't know if I'm that Godfather category, but that's a different topic. Yeah, so I think that the technology around blockchain is really, really impressive. But I would almost start with what are the implications for your listeners? What do they need to understand? And then we can talk about sort of the underlying technology. I think the single biggest implication of the arrival of technology is that we're going to go into an era where businesses or organizations that now make their living or make profit or whatever by being trusted third-party intermediaries are kind of in the crosshairs of this disruption. The reason why is because what blockchain technology at its core does is it solves what's known as the double spend problem for digital assets. You know, if I take a picture and I send it to you, Adam, I have a copy of the picture and you have a copy of the picture. And when it comes to information, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. But when it comes to assets or items of value, like I can't take a picture of a $20 bill, send it to you and say, hey, man, hey, mate, thanks for picking up dinner last week. Like that's not going to work. And so over the last 1,000 years, the entire infrastructure of the developed world has basically relied upon the fact that, okay, since we need to be able to trust that the ownership of one asset has in fact moved from Jeremy to Adam, and we can't just have, this sort of everyone taking, everyone else's word on it, and we can't just send you a copy of the asset in the digital world the way that we would in information. We have to go through third parties who basically say, okay, we verify that the ownership of this house or the ownership of this, car or whatever has in fact moved from Jeremy to Adam. And so obviously that was necessary to help grow the economy beyond the 15 people in your village or whatever. But as we moved into the digital era, we didn't really have a way to solve that until now. And that's what blockchain does through a really powerful kind of set of cryptography and the principles of decentralization. So that at its core, blockchain is sort of like one big Google spreadsheet or one big Excel spreadsheet, but instead of having it stored in one location, it's stored on computers all around the world. So everyone has a copy of it. So in order to transfer an asset, there's a sort of set of rules that you follow. It's called the protocol, but basically Jeremy might signal to the network, hey, I want to move 1 Bitcoin or this house or this car to Adam. And then the network basically has a mechanism to say, well, first of all, does Jeremy own this right now? Yes. Number 2 is, okay, let's send it to Adam. And let's verify that, in fact, and confirm that transaction has occurred. And now let's update the spreadsheet of everybody across the network. So now everybody, in fact, knows that the asset has moved from me to you. But what's happened is I've now sent it directly to you. We've done it with lower cost, faster time, greater security, because all of the information is not secured, is not kept in one place. And basically, we've done it without having to pay a third party to perform that service for us. And now we basically have been able to conduct commerce much more effectively. And everybody is, in fact, aware of the fact that the integrity of the system has been maintained. So it's pretty cool how it works. My advice to most business audiences, it's not that it works, it's not that how it works that it's important, it's that it works that important. And it's just like, you don't need to know that SMTP is the protocol that makes your email work. You just need to know email is better than faxing and sending a letter. That's exactly what I say to people. You don't have to fully understand blockchain. It's cool, it's worth exploring, but you have to understand is if your business is based on being a third-party trusted intermediary, now you're at some point going to be in the crosshairs of this thing. So hopefully it's a complicated thing. I've been doing it for 1.5 years. I'm still trying to get my head around it. So no one should feel bad, but hopefully that's a good kind of high level overview.
No, look, Jeremy, it really is. And I think, it is complex and people do need to sit down, pause and think it through. Because just as you say that, the implication of anyone playing the trusted intermediary role effectively being disrupted and moved out of the value chain. I mean, the implications for business and society, just massive, from banks, insurance, land title offices, property registers, stock exchanges, etc. So and I agree about not getting too hung up on the tech, in the same way we search on Google and we know there's an algorithm, but we don't really understand, we don't need to look under the bonnet of Google to know it works. I guess you're saying blockchain is here. And I don't know if it was our chat or the Alex Tapscott chat. I said, ultimately, is Bitcoin the world's largest proof of concept? Bitcoin surely proves beyond any doubt that, blockchain does work, it does scale, and it's real.
Yeah, I mean, you try. It was probably Alex's podcast because he's smarter, more articulate, definitely better looking than I am. So I'm going to give it to him. And he's also got more hair, so he wins on all accounts. But what I would say, and he's Canadian, which these days is definitely better than being a guy from DC. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important observation you just made. Like, give me an example of another network anywhere in the world that's basically been running since January 3rd, 2009, never had downtime, and never been hacked. Like, you're not going to find one, And that's what Bitcoin has been. Now, there have been hacks around the edges and the periphery, for sure. But the core Bitcoin network has been rock solid. And the mechanism, this proof of work thing and mechanism is basically this decentralized network has a mechanism to pay for its own security. It's like so genius. Like it's so awesome how it works.
Absolutely. And look, Jeremy, as we've said, so many implications for blockchain more broadly, and I touched on a lot of those with Alex, society-wide, but we are going to focus on the implications for marketing today. So you served up, I guess, the entree in your first ebook, which we talked about last time, Blockchain in the Mainstream. You had 33 contributors, some of the leading thinkers, writing articles and pulling those together. So I guess you've now released the next installment, if I can call it that, the CMO primer for the blockchain world. Very meaty, very substantive. What made you want to serve up, I guess, the main course after the entree?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, like I said, like the thing I'm always interested in is like if you think about marketing as a student of marketing, and I know you are, and I know that the people who listen to this podcast are also students of the game. And sadly, my experience is that most people who work in marketing are not. They kind of just do it because it's a paycheck. But there are people who are like passionate about the craft and trying to understand it. And that's really who this ebook is for. But if you think about the history of marketing, like, there's some things that I think are eternal about marketing. I call them Peter Drucker type marketing, like, know your customers, deliver value, sort of stuff that's going all the way back to the cavemen kind of stuff. But then what happens over time is as new technologies come on the scene, they change, expand, and challenge the way that marketing actually gets done. So go back, 150 years. I'm reading Tim Wu's book called The Intention Merchants. And he talks about sort of the arrival of like the penny papers in New York and how that changed the game for advertising, right? And then you go forward and like, okay, then he talks about, well, then it comes radio and then comes TV. And then you get closer like internet and social and mobile. And each of these new technologies, as everyone knows, like has changed the way that you have to sort of communicate with your potential customers and tell your story and the medium, Marshall McLuhan type stuff. All these things change how marketing gets done. And so my hypothesis is that, blockchain is going to similarly impact the function of marketing. So this ebook is really just an exploration. Like, I don't have all the answers. Like, it's naive and almost arrogant to say that I do. Although my wife tells me sometimes I am a little arrogant. So I guess it's possible. But basically, the point, I know I'm working on that, but that's like a therapy marital conversation. We'll do that in our next podcast. But what this was like, okay, let's like, this book is written for people who are students of the game. And my goal here is to say, okay, if you have a basic understanding of the technology and the implications, how does this sort of roll through some of the things that we think about as marketers? So what does it mean, for example, to, what's the effect on customer experience as we think about it? What is branding? Like, how does that change? What does advertising look like? What are commerce? Like, how does commerce and sales and like conversion rates? Like, what does loyalty look like? What do you do with data? Like, what about like, how do you manage and lead in like a decentralized world? These are for people who are thinking about, I want a career in marketing over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then, fundamentally understanding how does value get created in this world? Because like, that's what I think the lessons, if you go back 20 years ago, you'll find a lot of articles talking about, Amazon will never be able to defeat Barnes and Noble, right? You have all these things. But if you understand how value gets created as these new technologies evolve, it's not about just adapting the new technology to how you do things. It's what are the fundamental new innovations? Like no one 20 years ago knew about Uber, Facebook, or Airbnb. Not even knew about it, could have even figured it was coming. And now we have them, obviously. And so that's really what this book was, an effort to explore. And I just sort of put some ideas out there about, okay, here's what's happening. Here's how it might work. Here's what I think it might do in the near term. Here's what I think it might do in the long term. And, and then let's discuss it. And I was very fortunate to have some amazing people collaborate and contribute to sort of round out the book. So it's not just one crazy guy on the top of a hill yelling. So that made me feel better.
So is your hypothesis, Jeremy, you're almost trying to get marketers' heads out of the tactics and the day-to-day and the week-to-week into the bigger picture, and that this is sort of like the internet and we're sat in 1995? Is your hypothesis that blockchain is it's that much of a game changer that's sort of going to change everything? Therefore, marketing obviously needs to rethink its game.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. I mean, I think the Tapscots will say this is they'll call it the internet of value, right? And so 20 years ago, we had the internet of information, and now we have the internet of value. So yes, look, tactics are critical. It all comes down to execution. Like you have to do your day-to-day thing, and that's totally important. But if you are a student of the game and you really want to think about the long term, I think it's important when you have, and I'm making the argument, this is not like Google Buzz or Google Wave and Meerkat and stuff that's going to be gone tomorrow. Like this is a fundamental shift, and it's worth taking some time. If you're retiring in the next 2 years, you can probably not worry about it. But like I said, aside from that, like take a step back and say, okay, this thing's happening. I still have some time before it really crashes ashore. I tell people sometimes it's like a tsunami 50 miles off the coast that most people don't know is coming. All I'm trying to do is say, hey guys, this has all the markers of something that's going to make a pretty big impact on every every aspect of life, just as the internet did. Think about it now, get your head around this, start to explore it, start to understand it, so that like when you start saying, okay, now it's starting to really hit and become more mainstream, like you've already thought about, you don't get caught off guard. Like that's really what I want people to take away from this. Like, hey, there's a thing and I'm going to be ready for it so I don't get, Amazoned, as it were, or blindsided.
Yeah. Look, I've been through the content. It's highly, highly recommended for people who want to get across this topic. And just as a mini tangent, Jeremy, I don't want to go down a blind alley. We need a new word for ebook or a new brand, because EchoJunction, as it happens this week, we've just launched our first ebook. Yeah, like your document, we took a lot of pride, put a lot of time into it. I'd like to think it's a high quality document. Your book it's meaty, substantive, deep thinking. It's got, the CMO of NASDAQ, the CMO of Dun & Bradstreet. But I still hear the word ebook and I think crappy 4-page PDF telling me 10 ways to upload an Instagram image. We need another term. It's not book, but it's not ebook.
Yeah. I mean, I will say also, I haven't done the total deep dive on your, whatever we're calling this thing, piece of content. And I appreciate the depth you went on mine, but I do say at first glance, I'm going to throw back the recommendation and say, guys, you should really pick up the new EchoJunction one. Cause I think there's that's what I like. Look, I mean, that's why I love coming on your podcast, and thanks for having me, is because I love hanging out with people who are also students of the game. And I know that talking with you, we're going to make each other better. At least I'm going to get better. You might be worse off. So I apologize. But that's what I'm doing. So, I guess I have a lot of battles to fight. I agree with you calling it an ebook. A lot of people are like, wait, it's 67 pages. This isn't an ebook. I was like, yeah, I guess. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to worry about that particular battle right now. I got bigger dragons to slay, but I definitely hear your point. But, hopefully that's why I put the two CMOs on the cover. They're like, okay, well, these guys aren't jokers, so maybe I should open it up.
Yeah. Look, that's a nice segue, Jeremy, because I don't want to break your heart, but my favorite line in the whole book actually came from Rishi. So you had intros from the CMO of NASDAQ, CMO Rishi Dave, CMO of Dun & Bradstreet, because it's just such a brilliant line to get your head into the space of where we're going. And he said, brands that authentically add value to customers will win access to their personal data. Right. And just that single line, adding value, authentic, but winning access to personal data, it's kind of a game changer in thinking. It's like, hang on a sec, I already share everything for free on Facebook and, Snapchat and Amazon, and wow, my data's valuable. And so talk about the value exchange, because I love that concept of, brands having to earn the right to get access to our valuable data.
Yeah, no, that's a really, you're the first person I talked to who kind of honed in on how critical that line is. I mean, I deliberately sought these guys out because among CMOs on the planet, they're probably like the only two who actually, at this point, fundamentally understand it. I don't want to diss anybody else, but I've been looking for them. But I think what Rishi kind of understands is that the equation of where data resides in a blockchain world changes. In this current world of centralization, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they own you. They know everything that you're doing. I mean, they could manipulate elections. It's like that book, The Circle. I don't know if you read it, but it's kind of like a little eerie. It's a good one. But basically, that's the issue. But what Rishi understands is like, oh, wait, in a blockchain world, as we move to decentralization through these cryptographic processes that sort of underpin the blockchain, is like people are going to be able to control their own identity. And they're going to be able to give permission-based access, almost sort of a throwback to the Seth Godin original vision, like 20 some years ago. They're going to give permission-based access to brands and to other people, and then they're going to be able to take it back. Like the brand is not going to have the data sitting in some sort of data warehouse, which also begs the question of like what happens to CRM systems, but we can save that for another time. And it's like, okay, now if I want your data, you're going to have to like, I'm going to have to really earn it from you. I can't just like give me your information on a form and then I'm going to keep it and remarket to it and sell it to other people. Like, no, that's not going to work because I'm going to give you my email address with the permission that you can send me an email one time. And after that, it's going to get revoked. And I'm not going to, unless your first email is so good that I'll say, you know what, you can have it for the next 3 months. Bang. But you're not going to be able to move it because it's going to be cryptographically signed that I'm saying it's only Dun & Bradstreet can use this email address. And if you're not verified as Dun & Bradstreet, it doesn't matter. So like it'll be sort of this whole kind of paradigm shift where you have to constantly say with every interaction or every sort of tranche of interaction, like, hey, is this real value? Is this real utility? And getting your head around value is a really interesting topic. You could probably do 3 podcasts on that alone. But like, what is it that people really value? And there's a logical component, there's a financial component, there's an emotional component to all of these things. But what is it that people really, really value? And how do I understand that? What are the tools and ways that I can understand that so that I can give it to them in order to get more of their personal information on a permission-based permission-based, whatever I'm trying to say. There's a word that I'm blanking. It's late in the day. But then once I have it, then I use that permission-based, relationship, and I say, okay, now you've shared with me where you live, and now you've shared with me this because you're like, I trust you, and I'm going to trust you that you're going to use this information in a valuable way. And if you do, I'll give you access to more, and if you don't, I'm going to pull it back. And that's the game changer of this because you're going to be able to pull it back. So I think what Rishi's dialed in on is like, wait a second, you can't just like take information and abuse it, or customer information, data and abuse it. You have to say, all right, I understand you, and I'm going to focus on you as an individual and do everything I can to be like, yes, this is something that Adam is really going to value. And if I do that, Adam's going to share more. And if I don't, Adam's going to punish me because it will be easy for him to do that.
So, Jeremy, it leads me to think about Facebook and Facebook targeting, and look, in the ebook you run through 6 or 7 use cases which directly impact marketing, and I want to talk about customer experience, but let's jump to the advertising piece and disruption for advertising, because in the world you just described, one of Facebook's main sort of USPs is I can target 21 to 24-year-olds in the DC area that like sports and are looking for a first home, and we all know about the micro targeting capability of Facebook. In this world, we're only sharing bits of data with brands as we see fit. I guess that just turns that entire traditional targeting advertising model on its head.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, I think it's advertising. I was looking, if you look at the cover of the Wall Street Journal and the cover of the Financial Times today, it talks about how WPP, like their stock took like I think an 11% hit because their profits were down because people are not seeing the value. I mean, I think there are a couple elements. Like one data point that's in there that I just keep reciting, which I got somewhere along the way, is that for every dollar that a brand spends in order to send it and put an advertisement in front of a customer, they only get 44 cents of value because the chain, the sort of the all the intermediaries in the ad tech world between the brand and the publisher take away 56% of the whole thing. And like, so there's a perfect example, 56% basically waste as far as the brand is concerned. Well, hello, that's like a straight, you're like you're standing in the middle of the street and there's like a Marine sniper pointing a gun at you. Like that is just begging to get blockchain disrupted. And oh, by the way, that's exactly what's happening. There are already like 5 or 6 or 7, projects or companies that are starting to attack this because they see it, because they're using a decentralized way to kind of bring the value back. I mean, if you go to the Facebook example right now, Facebook's love and life, right? Obviously, but they're essentially being that third party intermediary. They're capturing the value from the individual, and we're giving them our data for free. And they're basically going to the brand saying, we've got everything and we're just going to squeeze you for all that money. So they're just taking it. But what if you could take Facebook out of the equation and make it so that a brand knew when they put up an ad, they knew for a fact that it showed up on a website. They knew it wasn't like robo clicking or whatever. They knew it was shown for the type of person, because again, coming back to the identity part, like, oh, we know that this person's been verified as somebody who lives in Australia, not somebody who is visiting Australia. Like you and I, if you and I are sitting next to each other at a co-working space in Sydney, which one day would be awesome. I haven't made it there yet, but we will. The advertiser in Australia doesn't want to waste their money on me, even though we both have the exact same, IP address effectively. That's a waste of money for them because I'm leaving. You're not. So those are the things that you can verify using the blockchain, and that's what these guys are trying to do. So I think you're going to see this huge amount of, to me, advertising far and away is the first function within marketing that's going to have the disruption. Now, it might take a while. There are a lot of entrenched interests. Don't get me wrong. But it's just sitting out there. You cannot allow to have a supply chain with 56% waste just exist when you have it. When you have a technology that can solve it. It might take a couple, iterations, but it's just obvious to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overconfident here, but it just seems very likely.
No, look, and you openly say in the book in a number of places, clearly, we don't have all the answers right now. And in fact, at one point, we don't even know all the questions. It's so new and the implications are so vast. And look, I think the whole ad tech efficiency, there's no question. There's kind of a utility functional benefit that blockchain will bring no matter what, squeeze out inefficiencies. But I guess on a broader basis, is it, are we moving more towards a world of one-to-one and a more functional, marketing as a business process? So sort of less art, more science, or not so much science, but large numbers of efficiently, executed relationship touch points with potential consumers and potential consumers, and less the kind of theater of the media machine today. Is that kind of on a decade or 2-decade long view where you see marketing going?
Yeah, I mean this is why I love talking to you, man. That's you said it more succinctly than I ever have. That's exactly where I think it's going. I think the science and the art's always going to be there, because I always tell people that I think of marketing as a wedding cake, but most people look at the wedding cake like, oh, how beautiful is all the icing and the decorations, and I'm like, 96% of this cake is batter, and if you can't make a cake that has good batter that doesn't fall apart when you stack it on top of each other, it doesn't matter how much icing you put on, because it's not going to be a good cake. So you need that science. You need to have the fundamentals. Excuse me, excuse me. Who's our audience? What type of people do we best serve in this? What are the things that motivate them? What's the value proposition that's going to resonate them? What should the messaging be? All of these, what should our strategy be? All of these fundamentals don't change. That's the science. How do we measure it? All that stuff. But then there's the art. It's like, okay, well, if Adam and Jeremy are both, students of the marketing game, and we both have, we love Joe Jaffe and we love Richard Stacy and we think Saul Colt has amazingly great taste in clothing or whatever it is. At the end of the day, they're all these similar things, but then there are a few subtle nuances that are going to like resonate with me versus resonate with you. I mean, we've never met, but I'm sure you have a much better fashion sense than I have. So like that could be something that feeds into the marketer's, science, but then interprets like we might see the same, ad or whatever it is for the exact same product, the exact same conference, if you will, but it's going to have a different look because like, oh, Adam, really responds well to this and Jeremy responds, doesn't have he has no, you can show him, contrasting colors and he won't even notice kind of stuff. So you can have that. I think that is kind of where it's going to go. And then the flip side is you're going to get the verification of knowing, hey, Adam definitely clicked through, or whoever the user ID that represents this individual who, we know lives in Sydney and we know likes marketing, even though we don't know it's Adam necessarily, really appreciate this and now is converting and has a token that represents the access to this event. Whereas this guy sitting on the other side of the world, didn't care, or this ID didn't really care. And then like, okay, well, how do we, use that to iterate for the next time and what have you? So I think, that's got to be, I don't know, it's got to be, but I think there's a decent chance that that's where it's headed.
Mm. So, Jeremy, so in the book, you chunk down the different areas, within the marketing sphere that will be impacted by blockchain and run through. So we had customer experience, branding, advertising, commerce and sales, loyalty, data, management and leadership. Look, again, encourage people to dive in and read these sections. We're clearly not going to be able to cover all of them in this chat now, Jeremy, but customer experience is obviously a theme, comes up frequently on this podcast. You mentioned Joe Jaffe, who's featured in the ebook we just put out, and he's all about the, retention is the new acquisition. So a couple of stats you quote in the book, which really flush that out. So Harvard Business Review, customers who've had the best past experiences spend 140% more than those that had poor experiences. And then we've got American Express saying that 55% walk away from an intended purchase because of poor customer service. So let's flush out kind of the customer experience theme and where does blockchain threaten? Where does it help? What does blockchain do in that broad sector?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things to understand here is that what blockchain does, remember, if we go back to the very beginning, we were talking about, this sort of universal Google sheet, or I'm an ex-Microsoft guy, so I Excel a lot, I like Excel, but like there's a shared data layer. So one of the things that now most people view as a competitive advantage is, we have the data, big data, we have all this data silos. But the challenge is like, well, what if everyone has the exact same data? What if everybody's looking at the exact same spreadsheet? Well, then all of a sudden, sort of the game has changed a little bit. You're no longer playing Aussie rules football. You're playing cricket or rugby, three sports that I fundamentally do not understand, but maybe one day, right? Like, I'm pretty good on the sports stuff, but those three I'm watching, my son and I are like, what the hell is going on here? We have like rugby's probably the one I have the closest, and that's only because I watched Invictus. But it's like, so now you have to say, okay, well, if everyone has the data, what does that mean? Well, it means that who gains the insights from the universally available data faster and turns those insights into action and has the action that resonates with the individuals based on the data. So it comes back to the previous conversation. It's like, okay, we have all this information about how people are, transacting on this particular global platform. What are the things? And like, okay, so if you come in and I'm building an app on top of this global database for access, well, what are the things that people like us are going to need? And then how do you build for those people? How do you build experiences that are really rich that sit on top of this universal data? So the value moves from who has the data to its who can help customers understand, interpret, act, and respond and get and increase their own value from the data. So that interpretive layer, which is both sort of a analytical side, but also sort of an emotional experiential side, that is the experience. So like if you're an app developer, like there are really two battles in this upcoming world. One is, can you build the most valuable protocol that has the most utility for the largest number of people, like these network effects, but on a community cooperative level? That's sort of a more, that's an interesting fundamental challenge. That's one side. The other side is, okay, if everybody has access to that protocol and everyone has access to that database, how do you create something that's really valuable for a customer segment about which you have a very strong understanding, and then how do you continue to increase the experience or the value of the experience or the perception of the experience based on how you see people transacting, even though, remember, you may not know it's Adam or Jeremy, you just know this particular ID uses this. Okay, well, what does that mean? They come on once a day versus every hour or whatever it is. And then how do you interpret that? So it's almost like you have to drive insights and innovation without actually knowing specifically who your customers are.
So, Jerry, it almost sounds sort of Darwinian, Jeremy, in the way that like a stock exchange is an efficient marketplace. In this blockchain world, there's sort of no place to hide. It's very transparent, and those that execute the best and the best player will win. Like the BS level gets just cut out in that environment, if I'm hearing you right.
I think there's a lot of truth in it. I mean, if you go to the branding sections, like one of the parts that I'm really excited about when it comes to branding is like, branding almost means like exactly that. You can't hide. Like, what does it think about brand in its absolute purest form? Like a brand is supposed to be a symbol of trust, right? And some people have called blockchain a trust machine. That's what the economists call it, in fact. And so think about this. Like the example I use all the time is like coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker. Probably comes across in this interview, right? So like big coffee drinker. So I mean, look, I'm a 44-year-old guy with 3 kids in a minivan. I don't drink. I'm a vegan. I don't smoke. I got nothing going on, so I have to OD on the caffeine. That's like that's my one throwback to being a teenager. So basically, what happens is like anyone can get a bag of coffee and slap a label on it that says organic, family-owned farm, from the, Rivera family in Nicaragua or something. Okay. But you actually have no way of knowing that is in fact true. But imagine if you could take your smartphone, wave it over the bag of coffee, and you could see and have 100% confidence that those beans, and you could see all the provenance of that supply chain. You're like, oh, it actually comes from the Rivera family, which is a woman-owned cooperative in Nicaragua. That's in line with my values. I want to support family farmers or whatever. I want to support companies that do that. And, now I trust them by like a significantly large margin because you've been able to substantiate your claim. Like there's this great book called Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout. And Trout, one of the quotes that's attributed to Trout is he said, claims of difference without proof are really just claims. And I think that's something that for a lot of marketers, like it's going to be a tough moment where we're like, if you can't back up your statement with immutable blockchain or blockchain equivalent based mathematical proof that what you're saying is 100% true, like you're probably going to get crushed at some point. Now, again, this might take a while, but on the flip side, you have an opportunity to significantly differentiate from your competition, to significantly increase the value proposition of your product or service by demonstrating, our product supply chain or all of our, we can show you, if you're a service provider, we can show you exactly how many hours the people are using because you can verify that these guys were at your offices or whatever. Like there are whole new ways that marketers are going to be able to partner with supply chain, with operations people in order to improve the story. And the story is not a BS story. It's a true story, and it resonates with your intended audience.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it because as you were chatting that through, Jeremy, I was sort of smiling to myself at one of the more, along with digital disruption and transformation, the overused sort of buzzwords at the moment seems to be storytelling, left, right, and center, and clearly an important aspect of marketing today. But again, when I fast forward a couple of decades in a blockchain world, it's not the storytelling, it's the doing. Stating you stand for something and painting a vision of what your brand represents kind of no longer matters. It's, in a blockchain world, it's how you perform and what you do that will be shining through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. Like, I guess I feel like you have, like, there's always a storytelling because there's an emotional component to the story. Like, I think like you still want to tell the story about the Rivera family and who they are, and they've been, caught growing coffee for generations, and this is something that they do, and like they get up every morning, and like this is their passion or whatever, and you have to back that up. It's like, okay, right now, like you read this source, like, oh, that's nice, but you don't actually know, like, no, actually, this does go all the way back. Like you'll be able to connect that. So I think there's still that kind of like, Chip and Dan Heath made to stick kind of, which is one of my classics that I think about in terms of like telling stories, because we're still people and we still respond to like these emotional cues. You're right, storytelling is kind of overused, although there's some great ones, and one of them's an Aussie, Bernadette Jiwa. I just love her stuff. She's great on the storytelling. She's like a legit storyteller, and I think so. There's a lot. So I don't know if it goes away, because I think humans still, we're sort of, our operating system is not going to update as quickly as the blockchains will. And I think we're kind of wired for stories, and that's how we transmit a lot. But I think, in this era of fake news and whatever, it's like you might be emotionally drawn in, but then it'd be like, all right, I'm going to get away from the reptilian brain for a moment, go to the other brain or whatever, amygdala, I can't remember what the other one's called. And you're like, wait a second. All right, got it. You hooked me, but before you totally hooked me, can you prove it? And you're like, oh, here's the blockchain. So I think they might go hand in hand. I don't know. It's a great question, though.
Yeah. No, I was thinking more, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz and just lifting the curtain. I guess you could. There's the whole lipstick on a pig thing. If the product sucks, the best marketing in the world is not going to get you out, but it maybe takes a longer time to be found out in the current world than in the kind of fully transparent, I can completely check out your claims about your packaging, your supply chain, not using a warehouse in using child labor in the third world and that kind of thing. That I suppose. Look, final question, Jeremy. Just being respectful of your time, like the theme, we're touching on it now. The theme of trust comes through in a number of sections, and you talk about the Edelman Trust Barometer, and that's been mentioned a number of times on this podcast. Clearly, we're at an all-time low in terms of the general consumer trust in in brands, in advertising, in government, in not-for-profit. It's across the board. Right. I guess, in the SAP world, we'll often talk about it's not about the technology per se. Blockchain on its own doesn't solve the trust problem. I guess it's asking all of us to lift the game, because it's going to shine a light on the truth. Like, blockchain comes in, magically these institutions don't become better, but I guess, are you hoping, like, without getting too deep, blockchain can actually be a driver for greater good all round, because we all kind of have to lift our game in this area?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, and I think you're just we'll see like institutions that are sort of relics, or not relics is too strong, but like that they were built in a pre-blockchain era, where they all sort of struggle with this kind of credibility angle, because you can hide even in social. Like, there's some things you can hide, but I think what the pressure is going to come from, at the end of the book, I talk about the blockchain native competition. And I think that's the hard part. It's like, it's one thing to understand how you can, this is probably going to go through two phases. Like, just like to go back to internet in the late 90s. If you recall, like 97, 90, or more like 98, 99, all the rage was corporate intranets, right? Everyone got excited about intranets. Well, that's natural in a first phase, which is existing companies saying, okay, there's this new technology. Cool. How do we use it to make our existing business processes better? And I think we're already starting to see that, particularly in banks. Like, okay, how do we use blockchains to make our stuff more efficient? And they should. Be my guest. Do it, Save a lot of money. Unfortunately, there are probably going to be some redundancies in terms of layoffs, which is sad. But from a overall efficiency perspective for the market, it's the right thing to do. But that's not enough. Where it's going to go in is like these brand, just like we have Uber and Airbnb and all these companies that in a pre-internet era could not exist. You're going to have these new companies that come in like, well, we don't have to go by your rules. We're going to start off, and we know that the key thing is transparent, because every transaction is available. And though that will put a ton of pressure on existing organizations. And it's just like, coming back to customer experience here, it's like, now that we all get our Amazon packages in 2 days, 1 day, 1 hour, our expectation is that every merchant's going to give us thing in 2 days, 1 day, 1 hour. Like, doesn't matter if it's Amazon. Like, that's the new sort of, they've set the standard. And I think what you'll see is, like, as blockchain native applications and protocols and companies start making their way in, you'll start asking yourself, well, wait a second, if I can send Bitcoin to the other side of the world and pay you, Adam, for whatever services, and the whole transaction settles in 10 minutes, why do I need a bank that's going to take 3 to 5 days or 3 weeks if I'm sending it to, like, I don't need that. Like, why, like, when you have instant liquidity in these 24/7 global markets, like, why do I have to kind of wait for you to just hold the float? Like, that's where and people will start saying, well, forget that. And it's already happened to me. I mean, I had a client in Switzerland, and we were initially trying to sort of work the traditional banking system to get for her to send me the money. And then I was like, this is stupid. It's like all these forms. So I was like, just pay me in Bitcoin. And she's like, all right, fine. Bang. 10 minutes later, I was paid. It was over. Done. Like, okay, that's much better than waiting like 30 days, 90 days, whatever. Done, you know?
Jeremy, great final answer. Honestly, it's such a complex but fascinating topic. We could do a Tim Ferriss 3-hour podcast, but I don't think anyone would be listening at the end. So I'm going to wind up the body of the interview and just really encourage anyone listening to dive into Jeremy's new, I'm going to have to call it ebook, but it's not cheap. It's not a 4-page PDF. It's a high quality document, the CMO primer for the blockchain world. I'll link that up in the show notes. Jeremy, in lieu of another quickfire round, let me just ask you to do a quick, as Bob Norp would say, shameless plug. I see you're now working with Don and Alex Tapscott. Tell us just briefly about the Blockchain Research Institute. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm very honored to be on that team. Basically, what the Tapscotts have done is they put together this Blockchain Research Institute, and they're looking at, I don't remember the exact numbers, like 8 verticals and 8 horizontals. Financial services, insurance, healthcare, whatever, and then marketing, finance, sales. And they basically pulled one person to be what they call the faculty member who's responsible for exploring what do blockchains do for this vertical or for this horizontal. Somehow they decided, maybe by the fact that no one else was thinking about blockchain marketing, I got the job. So I'm going to go with that one. But it's good to be the only guy, right? So I'm leading the charge on the marketing, and this ebook or the CMO primer was sort of the first foray to start thinking about it. But I'm really excited to be a part of that. And there's some really high quality people. Oliver Bussman, who used to be at Credit Suisse and Animal Ventures, and there are a lot of really super awesome people tackling different parts. And I think what I love about it is all of us are like, look, we understand this thing's huge. We don't quite know what it's going to be, but we're just going to explore it, and we're going to try to add value to the audience so that other people can say, all right, because at the end of the day, I think what we all fundamentally believe is, like, while no technology is inherently positive or inherently negative, I mean, clearly we know there are downsides to internet and downsides to social. On the whole, I think the internet and social and mobile have made the world a better place. And I think everyone in the Blockchain Research Institute, I haven't met them all, but my gut says we all believe that blockchains are going to make the world better, more transparent, more fair, more equitable, add value, all the things that we want. I mean, there are going to be downsides, to be sure, but on the whole, it's going to be a positive. And whatever I think, or at least I want to do whatever I can to help bring that future forward as quickly as possible. And by evangelizing and by sharing the thoughts and inviting people into the conversation, our hope is that more people will get involved, start trying to understand, and then together, you start, solve some really big problems like climate change and stuff like that can really be affected. But, we have to sort of, get our heads around this, and, hopefully it'll be a better, fairer world for my kids and your kids and everybody else, or whatever it is. So that's kind of, I think, what's behind it. And I'm just very excited to be working with, the Tapscotts, who are obviously pretty significant people in the space. So that's really cool.
No, great stuff. Look, I'll link that up in the show notes as well, the Institute. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. Before I let you go, where do you want to send people that want to learn a bit more about what you're up to at Never Stop Marketing? Yeah, so it's just neverstopmarketing.com. And then I blog pretty much every day. So fortunately, I have a great community of people, neverstopmarketing.com/blog. And that's where we discuss sort of blockchain and marketing and the intersection, and every now and then random stuff that I throw out there. But that's where I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are. And, they can download the ebook from my website as well, even though it's not really an ebook, right? Jeremy, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me, sir.
There we go, ladies and gents, Mr. Jeremy Epstein. Absolute pleasure to have him back on the podcast. Such a big, deep topic, even in a sort of lengthy podcast like this one, 45, 50 minutes. It's sort of hard to unpack all the implications of blockchain for marketers, but I guess the key message is this technology not going away, certainly something that marketers need to be aware of. Jeremy's book and his previous ebook as well, great start points for people that want to learn and educate themselves on this important topic. So thank you very, very much to Jeremy for coming back on the podcast. Episode number 121 coming to a close. Ladies and gents, thank you for your support of this podcast. For more information on EchoJunction and what we're up to in the social media technology market in Australia, please do head over to echojunction.com.au. Thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to seeing you on a future podcast episode.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe on iTunes, where you can also leave a review. Be social, and we'll see you again next week.